April 13th, 1612. The island of Funashima, in southern Japan. Sasaki Kojiro has been waiting for hours, his long sword, nicknamed the drying pole, polished like a mirror. The tide rises, the sun shifts, and impatience eats away at the young rival. When Miyamoto Musashi's boat finally appears on the horizon, Kojiro unsheathes his nodachi and hurls the scabbard against the rocks on the beach. Musashi, standing at the stern, smiles without hurry. You've already lost. Whoever throws away the scabbard declares that he has no intention of ever picking it up again. Musashi steps down calmly, holding not a sword, but a rough wooden bokken he carved from his own oar during the crossing. With a single blow, delivered with the precise economy of a man who doesn't waste a single inch of movement, Kojiro collapses onto the sand. The duel lasts only seconds. The entire life Musashi built to get there, decades. The greatest turnaround possible in a human existence isn't found in doing more. It's found in carrying less. Most people don't fail for lack of talent. They don't fail for lack of intelligence or opportunity, even though it's comforting to believe that. People fail because they scatter their energy in too many directions at once. It's a slow leak, almost imperceptible, the kind you only notice when the bill arrives at the end of the month. Musashi observed this among the warriors of his time. The man who tried to master many styles of combat mastered none. What looked like versatility was, in truth, fragility in disguise. In the book Go-Rin no Sho, written by him in 1645 inside a cave called Rei-Gando, there's a sentence that sounds simple but isn't. The way of strategy is the way of nature. He was pointing to something that modern psychology would confirm centuries later. When William James wrote The Principles of Psychology in 1890, he described human attention as a finite resource, one that gets spent the way a muscle gets tired. You can't focus on everything. Whoever tries loses focus on all of it. Think about how many tabs are open in your browser right now, how many parallel conversations in your messaging app, how many personal projects started and never finished, waiting for a return that never happens. Each one of these things consumes a piece of your attention, even when you're not looking at it. It's like leaving 10 faucets half open at home and wondering why the water bill came in so high. Before any reorganization of your life, you have to see clearly where your energy leaks out every day. This isn't a motivational exercise. It's a silent diagnosis, almost clinical, of the real terrain you find yourself standing on. Seneca, in his letters to Lucilius, written in the 1st century of the Common Era, described that same phenomenon in words that feel almost modern. Nowhere is the man who is everywhere. He observed how a man who tries to keep up with many subjects truly keeps up with none. 20 centuries before the term multitasking was invented, the Roman philosopher already understood the arithmetic of attention. Each switch of focus leaves a mental residue that reduces your capacity for depth in the next activity. Multiplied by hundreds of switches a day, the cumulative effect is a fragmented mind operating far below its own capacity. It isn't a lack of intelligence, it's an attention architecture that has been badly configured. That's the default state of most people today. Not a state they chose, but a state they inherited from a culture that rewards whoever responds quickly, whoever is always present, whoever never says no. The result is an entire generation exhausted without really understanding why. The person wakes up tired, takes breaks and stays tired, goes on vacation, and the exhaustion comes back on the second day after returning. It isn't physical exhaustion. It's exhaustion from attention split into fragments too small to sustain anything serious. Musashi wrote, centuries before any electronic device existed, that the warrior must cultivate perception in every moment, even the trivial ones. He understood that the human mind is shaped or unshaped in the small choices, not in the big events. The problem is that modern society teaches the opposite of that. It teaches that change comes from adding one more online course, one more self-help book, one more productivity app with colorful notifications promising to organize your life, one more goal for the new year, written in careful handwriting in a notebook that will be abandoned by February. Musashi, in the Dokudo, defended the exact opposite of that logic. "Do not collect weapons or practice with weapons beyond what is useful," he wrote in one of his final precepts. He was speaking literally of swords, spears, and bows. Today, we carry a similar weight, only invisible. Unfulfilled ambitions, abandoned plans, multiple identities we try to maintain in parallel. The professional self, the creative self, the social self, the family self, the healthy self. Each one of these versions demands time, and the day still has the same 24 hours it had in the 17th century. Excess, contrary to what modern culture suggests, doesn't strengthen, it paralyzes. Every commitment accepted out of politeness, every subscription kept out of inertia, every relationship preserved out of habit, every ambition piled up without need, is an extra weight you carry for the rest of the journey. Before asking what to add to your life, the correct question is a different one. What's left over here that pretends to be essential? What's taking up space without delivering value? Which part of the weight you carry in your head, on your calendar, and in your heart should have been left behind a long time ago? The truly free life isn't the full life. It's the life cleaned of what doesn't belong. There's a first trap in this process. Most people try to change without ever having stopped to understand who they really are. They make big decisions based on trends, on opinions, on comparisons, fed by the algorithm. They see someone thriving in a specific career and start chasing the same career without asking whether it actually fits their nature. They see an idealized lifestyle in a short video and try to reproduce that lifestyle in their own home, on their own budget, in their own reality. The result is a life built in layers of imitation. Any change made without self-knowledge is just a reaction. Reactions are prisons disguised as freedom. The most famous inscription at the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, carved into the stone centuries before the Common Era, contained only 3 Greek words, gnothi seauton, know thyself. Socrates made that phrase the axis of his entire philosophy, and the thinkers who came after him understood that without that starting point, any other investigation becomes useless. Without self-knowledge, you aren't driving your own existence. You're being driven by it. Musashi, in another language and another era, wrote a sentence in the Go-Rin no Sho that echoes the same principle in another form. From one thing, know 10,000. Whoever observes himself with depth understands human patterns that hold true for any person in any context. Set aside an entire week to observe yourself the way you would observe another person, where your time actually goes, which conversations drain you, which environments open you up, at what point in the day your energy collapses and why, what kind of thought repeats itself in your head when you're alone in the car, on the subway, before falling asleep. That map is the starting point. You can't change a territory you don't know. You can't renovate a house using a blueprint you've never read. This work is uncomfortable because it exposes truths about yourself that nobody wants to see. That very discomfort is what separates the people who change from the people who only talk about changing. Use a simple notebook, actual paper. At the end of each day, during that week, write down 3 things. The moment when you felt most alive. The moment when your energy crashed. The conversation, the task, or the stimulus that drained you the most that day. By the end of the 7 days, clear patterns will begin to emerge. Patterns you always suspected, but never confronted directly. Maybe a specific person shows up often in the column of what drains you. Maybe a certain kind of task always brings you back to life. Maybe that mid-afternoon stretch, when you usually scroll through your phone without any purpose, is sucking the best of your attention every single day. Those patterns are your real map. Without it, any decision about the future is just a guess. There's a huge difference between observing yourself in passing and observing yourself with method. Most people live in the first mode, thinking they live in the second. They believe they know themselves well because they've thought about themselves a few times in moments of crisis or occasional reflection. Real self-knowledge demands method, demands repetition, demands the humility to recognize that what you think about yourself is most of the time a comfortable narrative built to keep the inner peace. That narrative doesn't necessarily correspond to the real territory. This is one of the reasons why so many attempted changes fail right at the beginning. The person isn't renovating their actual territory. They're renovating a fantasy they have about their own territory. Now, the second structural mistake of modern life appears: the attempt to walk several routes with the same intensity. Serious career, ambitious hobby, intense relationship, side project on the weekends, language study in the early mornings, physical training 5 times a week. Each one of these fronts is worthy on its own. Together, they turn into a swamp. Musashi defended the concept of the single path, what he called Heiho no Michi, the way of strategy. It didn't mean abandoning everything else. It meant electing a master priority that organizes everything around it. It meant that there's one main direction and everything else either serves it or submits to it. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, speaks several times about what he called hegemonikon, the ruling part of the soul. For the philosopher emperor, living well meant keeping that ruling part focused on a single principle, without letting it get dragged around by 1,000 different stimuli throughout the day. People who produce anything excellent in any area of life make a clear choice about where to place their deepest attention, and they protect that choice with something close to intolerance. Everything else gets organized around that core. It isn't an ascetic or solitary life. It's a life with internal hierarchy. A life in which there's one center, not 17 centers, competing with each other every day of the week. For the next 6 to 12 months, elect a central axis. Just one. Everything has to orbit around that axis, never compete with it on equal footing. Maybe it's a professional project. In some cases, it'll be mastering a specific skill. For other people, it'll be rebuilding their health or getting out of a specific financial situation. What matters is that this choice becomes the fixed point. When another opportunity shows up along the way, and it will show up dressed as something irresistible, the question isn't whether that opportunity is good. The question is whether it serves the axis. If it doesn't, it waits, even if it looks like a once-in-a-lifetime chance, even if turning it down hurts. This is the point where most people quit before they even start, because choosing a direction means inevitably giving up on others. It means closing doors. It means accepting that you won't be everything at once. There's a silent grief built into that choice, and few people are willing to live through that grief. They'd rather keep every door cracked halfway open, with the permanent fear that they're missing something better on the other side. The result is a life made of half steps, no real commitment to anything, no depth built in any territory. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote, in the 19th century, that the door to happiness opens outward, not inward. The sentence sounds enigmatic, but it has a direct meaning. Whoever stands there trying to break the door inward, pushing, forcing, wanting to enter every room at the same time, never manages to open it. The door opens when you take a step back and choose, with clarity, which room you actually want to inhabit. That step back, that apparent retreat, is what makes the advance possible. Refusing is a way of affirming. Every no said with conviction is a yes said with depth. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher born a slave in the 1st century, taught something similar to his students in Rome. The robustness of any life depends not on what you add, but on what you know how to do without. You don't strengthen the body by piling up supplements, but by eliminating what sickens it. You don't strengthen the mind by piling up information, but by eliminating noise. Life isn't strengthened by the sum of commitments. It's strengthened by the courage to let go of what doesn't belong. That principle, though ancient, is still what separates the people who build something solid from the people who run in circles for decades without ever leaving the same spot. Along with choosing the axis comes the art of subtraction. We accumulate commitments out of inertia, relationships that burned out years ago but keep getting watered out of habit. Monthly subscriptions billed to a credit card no one even uses anymore. Clothes kept for a version of ourselves that may never come back. Books bought with the intention of reading them that ended up as shelf decoration. The phone screen lights up at 11:47 at night, illuminating the tired face of someone who should already be asleep. And another 45 minutes go by on a scroll that delivers absolutely nothing. In the Dokudo, Musashi warns with absolute clarity. Do not cling to possessions you no longer need. He was referring to material life, but the principle stretches far beyond that. This principle applies to old beliefs you inherited without questioning. It applies to environments that hurt you, but where you stay because they're familiar. It applies to social circles maintained out of inertia, not real affinity. It applies to a version of yourself that no longer matches who you are now. The Zen monks of medieval Japan, contemporaries of Musashi himself, taught detachment as a daily practice, not as abstract philosophy. The essence is simple and uncomfortable. Whoever carries everything doesn't walk. Make a subtraction list. 10 things that need to leave your life this month. Maybe it's a recurring commitment you accepted only out of politeness. In some cases, it'll be a specific social network that steals 3 hours of your day without delivering anything in return. For others, it'll be a hard conversation you've been putting off for months, or an object that takes up physical and symbolic space at the same time. The criterion is simple, and at the same time, brutal. If that thing, person, or practice no longer serves you, it's occupying the place where something essential could come in. The space created by subtraction is where the new is born. Without space, there's no birth. In that subtracted space, the next necessity shows up: silence. We live in permanent noise. Notifications arriving at intervals of minutes. Other people's opinions fighting for attention. Short-form content that ends, and then another starts, and another, and another. Empty conversations held out of social obligation. Background music everywhere. The sound of the television in the apartment next door. The beep of the microwave echoing in the empty kitchen after 10 at night, while the reheated coffee sits forgotten on the counter and the phone glows on the table demanding attention. The human brain wasn't designed for this constant volume of stimulus. The ancient philosophers already knew this, even in a world infinitely quieter than ours. They understood that the mind needs periods without stimulus so that thought can organize itself on its own. Sensory overload fragments the capacity to think with depth, and that fragmentation, over time, becomes the default state. Musashi retreated to caves and mountains precisely to forge his mind and his art. Solitude, for him, wasn't an escape from the world. It was a workshop. It was the space where form becomes possible. In the ancient Greek world, the philosophers called this otium, a time without distraction, without immediate purpose, in which the mind reorganizes itself on its own. Seneca defended otium as the most valuable state of adult life. Without it, the Roman philosopher said, a person lives like the wind, goes everywhere and arrives nowhere. Set aside, daily, blocks of absolute silence. No phone, no music, no one else. Start with 30 minutes a day if you've never done this before. It may sound like very little. It isn't. For most people, 30 minutes without any external stimulus is an almost unbearable challenge in the first few days. The mind will scream. It will ask for the phone. It will invent fake urgencies. That's exactly the symptom that proves the necessity. Persist. Within a few weeks, something starts to happen. Ideas that had been buried for months start to surface. Decisions that seemed complicated become obvious. You start hearing yourself, instead of hearing the algorithm telling you who you are. The French philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote in the 17th century a sentence that seems to have been written for contemporary life. All of humanity's unhappiness comes from a single thing, which is not knowing how to stay at rest, alone in a room. He observed, in the middle of a period when the French court was showing off its peak of entertainment and baroque distractions, that people were running from themselves all the time. They hunted, they gambled, they partied, they kept themselves busy with anything so they wouldn't have to be alone with their own minds. 4 centuries later, the escape continues, only technologically more efficient. The smartphone is the pocket-sized escape room. It's always there, promising a place to flee to whenever the silence starts to speak. When the silence starts to speak, it doesn't always say comfortable things. That's the real reason so many people avoid silence. It isn't lack of time, even though that's the excuse they use. It's fear of what might emerge when the noise stops. Memories that were pushed down deep, postponed decisions asking for review, sorrows never lived through, dissatisfactions that were never named. Silence is the therapist's office without the therapist. It's you, by yourself, with no mediation. That's why it's the ground where change happens. There's no other way. Every real transformation requires this silent encounter with yourself, several times throughout the process. At this point, the path of transformation parts ways with the path of entertainment, because most people wait for motivation to act. They wait to feel like it. They wait for the right moment, the right mood, the right energy. That motivation rarely shows up with the frequency needed to sustain a real transformation. Musashi trained alone, every single day. No audience, no emotional hype, no soundtrack. He wasn't chasing inspiration, he was building discipline. Inspiration is sporadic, discipline is structural. Inspiration is a cloud. Discipline is bone. There's an old principle, repeated by Eastern and Western masters across the centuries, that echoes Musashi almost literally. You don't rise to the level of your ambitions. You fall to the level of your daily habits. Practical translation. It doesn't matter how high your stated ambition is if your daily routine doesn't sustain that ambition. Ambitions change with your mood. Habits, when well built, operate even on the days when you're tired, frustrated, not feeling it. Those are exactly the days that build real transformation. Whoever only acts when they feel like it is a hostage to their own mood. Whoever acts regardless of mood owns their own path. Establish 1 to 3 non-negotiable practices for the next 6 months. Non-negotiable, that means they happen even when you're sick. They happen even when the day was terrible. They happen even when no one will see, no one will praise, no one will hold you accountable. Maybe it's an hour of reading a day. In other cases, 40 minutes of physical exercise. For some, it'll be an hour of deep work on a specific project before anything else in the day. The content matters less than the consistency. Over time, discipline stops being effort and becomes identity. You're no longer forcing yourself to do it. It's just who you are. Aristotle, in the Nicomachean Ethics, written in the 4th century before the Common Era, had already formulated this principle with absolute clarity. The virtues, he said, are not born in us by nature, nor against nature. We are born with the capacity to receive them, and we perfect them through habit. The Greek philosopher understood that human character is shaped physically by repeated actions, not by declared intentions, not by motivational affirmations, not by plans tucked away in a drawer. Every time you carry out a practice, even on a day when it was hard to carry out, you strengthen a specific internal disposition. Every time you give in to the impulse to quit, you strengthen the opposite disposition. Repetition is the chisel. Isolated intention is just wind. What defines who you're becoming isn't what you think about doing, it's what you actually do when willpower isn't cooperating. There's an important detail here that few people notice. Discipline doesn't fight desire. Discipline only chooses which desires get obeyed, because we are, all of us, governed by quick desires. Processed food when the day was heavy. Endless scrolling when boredom shows up. Short pleasures when anxiety nags. Cheap dopamine in the form of likes, comments, short videos, impulse purchases. The smartphone took this brain mechanism and industrialized it. Your pulse speeds up a little before you open the banking app, even though you know there's nothing new there, simply because the gesture has become wired into the nerve. Every time you unlock the screen, the system serves up a small chemical reward, and you go back looking for that reward minutes later without even realizing it. Musashi wrote, without sugarcoating, in the Dokudo, free yourself from desire throughout your entire life. It doesn't mean denying pleasure or living like a monk. It means not being dominated by it. It means you choose your pleasures instead of being chosen by them. There's an ancient Greek word for that state, enkratia, self-mastery. not in the sense of repression, but in the sense of internal sovereignty. Whoever has enkritia owns their own house. Whoever doesn't is a guest in their own home. Identify your main impulses, the ones that pull you off your chosen route the most. Maybe it's the compulsive phone check the moment you wake up. For others, it'll be emotional shopping when something went wrong at work. In certain cases, it'll be food used as an anesthetic at the end of the day. Once the impulses are identified, create friction against them. Make the wrong thing hard to do. Take the phone out of the bedroom, leave it in another room overnight. Delete specific apps for 30 days. Don't keep at home what you don't want to eat compulsively. This work of environmental design is more powerful than any one-off act of willpower. Willpower runs out. The environment, once configured, works on its own. Understanding philosophy is interesting. Practicing philosophy can change your life. Start with the link I left in the pinned first comment. Before discipline, before subtraction, before choosing the axis, there's an internal posture that all of this depends on. Acceptance. Many people live in permanent war against reality, mourning the past, complaining about the present, fearing the future, fighting with traffic, with the economy, with the weather, with the family, with their own body. Every minute spent in that war is a minute stolen from their own transformation. Mental energy spent on revolt is energy that won't go into building. The first precept of the Dokudo is direct. Accept everything just the way it is. Acceptance isn't resignation. It isn't passively settling. It isn't saying everything's fine when it isn't. Acceptance is the lucid recognition of the battlefield you find yourself on. It's looking at reality without the filter of wanting it to be different. Only from that clear vision is it possible to act effectively. The warrior who denies the ground he's standing on loses before the combat even starts. The Roman Stoics called this amor fati, love of fate. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome between the years 161 and 180, wrote in his Meditations, in a private journal he never intended to publish, sentences that still work today as a manual of psychological survival. If you're distressed by something external, the emperor wrote, the pain doesn't come from the thing itself, but from the judgment you make of it. And that judgment, you have the power to revoke at any moment. Marcus Aurelius wasn't writing from the balcony of an easy life. He was writing during military campaigns, losing children to disease, governing an empire in collapse. Acceptance for him was the basic posture of someone who wanted to keep functioning in the middle of chaos. Make a list of the things you can't change. Concrete things. Other people's decisions that have already been made. Past events that can't be rewritten. Aspects of your biography that are what they are. Real limitations of your current moment. Decide today to stop fighting against those things. All the energy you free up in that process should be redirected to what is under your control. Your choices, your routine, your attention, your reaction. That redirection is, perhaps, the most underrated technique of personal transformation that exists. It doesn't need an app. It doesn't need a subscription. It doesn't need equipment. Along with acceptance comes the most subtle work of all, the emptying of the mind. Our heads are always full, plans not executed. Imagine conversations with people that may never happen, worries about scenarios that won't materialize, mental rewrites of old arguments in which this time you say the right thing. All that constant mental activity consumes energy, even when you don't notice it. Worse, it creates a film between you and reality. You no longer live what's happening. You live the interpretation of what's happening. You live the noise about the event, not the event. Musashi, in the 5th book of Gorin no Sho, describes what he called the void, ku, in the original Japanese, a mental state without attachment, capable of seeing reality without distortion. It isn't void in the sense of nihilism. It isn't an absence of meaning. It's an operational emptiness. The mind that isn't full can receive whatever comes. A full cup can't hold any more tea. An empty cup can. In Zen, this image has been repeated for centuries. In one of the most famous dialogues attributed to the Japanese monk Nan-in, when he receives an arrogant university professor and pours tea into a cup that was already overflowing. It isn't about not thinking. Thinking is necessary and useful. It's about not being trapped by your own thinking. Treat thoughts like clouds passing across the sky, not like orders that have to be obeyed. Practice a simple emptying ritual. Set aside 10 minutes at the start of the day, before any notification. Grab a physical notebook with a pen. Write down everything that's occupying your head at that moment. No filter, no judgment, no worry about grammar or logic. The physical act of transferring mental content onto paper frees up the internal space. The page becomes the external memory. Your head goes back to being available for the present. Along with that emptying comes the development of another capacity almost lost in the contemporary world, the capacity to truly see. We're surrounded by information but blind to the essence. We confuse looking with seeing. We see images all the time, but we rarely perceive what they mean. We read headlines without understanding the context. We've known people for years without ever having noticed who they really are. The surface has become the limit of our attention. Musashi made a crucial distinction between two types of vision. Ken, the eye that looks, sees outer appearance, visible movements, the form. Kan, the eye that perceives, sees intentions, internal rhythms, what lies behind the form. In a duel, the warrior who depended only on Ken was defeated by the one who had developed Kan, because visible movements are only the final part of a decision that began long before, in the opponent's intention. Whoever sees only the gesture reacts too late. That distinction, though it was born in combat, applies to practically everything in adult life. At work, whoever sees only the official talk misses the real politics of the environment. In relationships, whoever sees only the words misses the emotional patterns repeating themselves underneath. In financial decisions, whoever sees only the product doesn't see the system. In your own emotions, whoever sees only the final explosion doesn't see the silent build-up that lasted weeks. Developing Kan is slow work. It can't be bought. It can't be downloaded. It's built through conscious practice of observation. Faced with any important situation, before reacting, ask yourself a simple thing. What am I not seeing here? What larger pattern is this scene revealing? What motivation underneath the stated motivation is in play? Pause before answering a difficult message, before accepting a tempting offer, before brushing aside an offer that seems inadequate. True perception is only born in inner silence, in that interval of a few seconds when you're not reacting, you're observing. This process of subtraction, focus, and perception starts producing an interesting side effect. You start comparing yourself less to others. On its own, that's already one of the greatest liberations available in contemporary life. We compare ourselves obsessively, on social media, at work, in salary, in relationships, in our bodies, in our homes, in our travel calendars. Comparison has become a permanent layer of experience, activated all day long by continuous exposure to other people's curated lives. That comparison corrodes any real progress, because the reference point is always shifting somewhere outside of you. Musashi said a sentence that sounds banal and isn't. Today's victory is over your yesterday's self. External victory is fragile. It depends on other people's performance, on market conditions, on luck, on the mood of whoever is judging you. Internal victory is structural. It depends only on whether you've moved forward from the point you were at before. That measure, though less spectacular, is the only one that builds something solid over time. You're not in a race against others. You're in a race against the version of yourself that existed a year ago, a month ago, a week ago. The masters of the ancient Eastern arts already understood this principle before any modern pedagogy named it. Excellence in any field doesn't come from raw talent, but from the ability to continuously measure your own performance against yourself, adjust and repeat, not against others, against yourself. In Bushido, the code of the samurai warriors, this principle appeared in several texts. The trail of the warrior is the trail of inner refinement. That internal measure is what allows you to accumulate real progress over the months and the years. Stop measuring your life by someone else's ruler. Start measuring your life by the internal distance between who you were and who you are becoming. That distance requires something contemporary society has almost punished: the ability to walk alone. We make decisions thinking about what others will think. We live waiting for external approval to feel that we're heading in the right direction. Before any important choice, we consult the group, we post the question, we ask for opinions. The result is a life made of consensus, an average life, safe, predictable, in which no one criticizes you openly, but no one can recognize you as singular either. External approval is an anesthetic. You don't feel pain, but you don't feel direction either. It's no accident that Musashi's final work, written a week before his death in 1645, is called Dokudo. In literal translation, the trail of walking alone. He wasn't preaching social isolation. It wasn't a manual for becoming a hermit. He was preaching something much more subtle and much more difficult: emotional and decisional autonomy. The ability to know from the inside, without needing to ask anyone, what the next right step is. Carl Jung, in a completely different register, wrote in the middle of the 20th century that the goal of psychological maturity is what he called individuation, becoming who you are, as distinct from who others expected you to be. This week, try a simple experiment. Make at least one decision of some weight without consulting anyone, without posting on social media, without seeking validation. Just observe yourself. Listen to what comes up when the external noise is taken out of the equation, and decide. Maybe it'll be a small decision. In other cases, it'll be a big decision. What matters is the method. You're relearning how to be your own counselor. That skill, with practice, develops like any other. Only nobody teaches it because nobody profits from it. There's no app, there's no course, there's no community. There's only you and your own voice, slowly relearning how to listen to itself. The exercise is strange at first. You'll feel the temptation to grab your phone to send a message asking what someone thinks. You'll feel the urge to search online for what other people did in similar situations. You'll feel a slight physical discomfort, almost anxiety, when you realize you're about to decide something without the collective stamp of approval. The fluorescent bathroom light in the middle of the night, when you wake up to check your phone and find there were no messages at all, is the small portrait of that dependence. That discomfort is the symptom of how much you've outsourced your autonomy over the years. It isn't personal weakness, it's an entire cultural pattern installed inside you. Like any pattern, it only changes with deliberate practice in the opposite direction. The American philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, in 1841, in an essay called Self-Reliance, one of the most radical sentences ever written about autonomy. Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates to that iron string. He argued that society conspires against the individuality of each of its members, offering security in exchange for silent obedience. Whoever accepts that deal lives a comfortable life, but doesn't live a life of their own. They live a borrowed life. At the end of the road, looking back, they realized they never made a single truly personal decision. Everything was negotiated, researched, approved by some invisible collective before it happened. There's another silent enemy of this process: haste. The current generation wants immediate results. They want to see change in weeks. They want to post transformation in 30 days. They want to compress alchemy into a half-hour motivational playlist. They give up when transformation doesn't happen within that absurd deadline. Musashi spent decades perfecting his art before being recognized as the greatest swordsman in Japan. Those weren't decades of casual training. They were decades of intense practice, with defeats, doubts, periods of retreat to the mountain, returns to combat, technical adjustments, entire philosophical reformulations. He understood something that the world of instant gratification pretends not to know. The warrior in a hurry dies before the fight even begins, because he skips the steps that would sustain his victory. He specializes in superficial performance and stops building the structural base. In the first serious confrontation with reality, that non-existent foundation collapses. The person goes back to square one, now with the added disadvantage of discouragement. Whoever has tried to start a diet 5 times in the same year knows exactly what we're talking about. Each new attempt is less powerful than the one before, not for lack of information, from an excess of haste. Plan in horizons of 6 to 12 months, not 6 to 12 days. Measure progress monthly, not daily. Day-to-day life has too many variations to serve as a reliable thermometer. A bad day doesn't mean failure. A bad week doesn't mean failure. The correct question is whether, when you look at the month that just ended, there's movement in relation to the previous month. If there is, the system is working. If not, adjust the system. Don't punish yourself. Just adjust. Time is the most underrated ally in the world. It turns small efforts into big results, as long as you don't quit making the small effort every day. The fogged up window of the bus at 6 in the morning, repeated for 300 days in a row, is what builds any serious career, not the spasmodic inspiration of the day you made the decision. Along with patience, there's another principle that seems contradictory with modern life. The idea that depth in a single thing opens 10,000 doors. We live in a culture that values shallow versatility, knowing a little about a lot of things, having an opinion on every subject, being present in several fields at the same time. Musashi wrote, with an almost uncomfortable clarity, a sentence that still challenges this model today. From one thing, know 10,000. It isn't mysticism, it's practical observation. Whoever truly masters a single art, a single skill, a single field, develops in the process principles that transfer to any other territory. Patience, observation, sense of rhythm, tolerance for frustration, capacity to iterate, sustained focus. Those principles, once built, travel with the person to any other activity they want to take up afterward. The musician who studied seriously for 10 years knows how to study anything. The athlete who trained seriously for a decade knows how to build discipline in any area. The craftsman who dedicated years to a trade knows how to work in silence on any project. The ancient Chinese had a proverb that said, in order to master 10,000 things, you first had to learn to sit alone with one thing until it revealed its secret. The capacity to dwell on a single question until it reveals something is the skill that lies beneath all human excellence. That capacity isn't innate, it's built through choice and practice. Choose one skill or one field. Dive into it for 6 full months. Maybe it'll be writing. In other cases, it'll be a form of exercise. For some, an instrument. For others, a manual craft or a specific area of study. Depth in one field naturally expands your entire life. We arrive at the emotional weight that silently sabotages this whole process. Resentment, envy, regret. 3 weights we carry from the past that drain all the energy that should be going into the present. 3 precepts of the Dokodo address this directly. Do not regret what you have done. Never be envious. Resentment and complaint are not appropriate either for yourself or for others. Musashi wasn't being rude with those sentences. He was being surgical. Those 3 emotions consume more mental fuel than any demanding external task. Resentment is grief that hasn't been resolved. It's the expectation that the past should be different from what it was. It's the repetitive internal conversation with people who are no longer in your life, or who wouldn't listen even if they were. Envy is the deflected recognition of something you want and don't yet have, redirected as anger toward the person who has it. Regret is the refusal to accept that, at the moment you made that decision, it was the best decision you were capable of making with what you knew at that moment. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations that the human soul harms itself when it becomes an abscess of the universe, when it turns into revolt against what exists. That image is strong and precise. Resentment is an internal abscess. It doesn't heal on its own. It has to be drained consciously. Identify the main resentment you're still carrying. Maybe it's against a father, a mother, an old boss, a past partner, a friend who betrayed your trust. In other cases, it'll be against yourself for a decision you wish you'd made differently. Write a letter to that person, a letter that will never be sent. Say everything, no censorship, no concern for style, no worry about narrative fairness. Then, read what you wrote. Consciously choose to release that load. Not because the other person deserves it, not because what happened was right, but because carrying it for one more day means letting that person or that event continue to govern your mental energy. For the journey ahead, lightness isn't a luxury, it's an operational requirement. There's an ancient principle known by the Stoic philosophers and by spiritual masters of various traditions that supports this exercise. The act of transforming a confused experience into organized words forces the mind to reprocess the event. What was loose in the form of raw feeling reorganizes itself into the form of an understandable narrative. Understandable narratives weigh less than raw feelings. That's why true confessions bring relief, why deep conversations heal, why old journals hold the meaning of time. The letter that's never sent performs the same invisible operation, only without needing an external listener. You are, at the same time, the one who speaks and the one who listens. That silent encounter with yourself, though uncomfortable, is exactly what dissolves the accumulated weight. There's also a subtle point about regret that's worth saying carefully. You're not the same person who made that old decision. That individual, with those emotional resources, with that level of maturity, with those specific fears, decided what they were able to decide at that moment. Punishing the person you are today for the choices of the person you were is a cruel form of internal injustice. It doesn't mean pretending there was no mistake. It means recognizing that the mistake was made by a version of you that no longer exists, and that that version did the best it could with what it had. Letting go of regret is, deep down, offering yourself the same compassion you would offer a dear friend in the same situation. There's also a weight few people touch openly, the fear of finitude. The unconscious fear of death that paralyzes so many important decisions. We put off conversations because we have the illusion that there will be time later. We avoid risks because we assume life will be long enough to wait for the right moment. We live without intensity because deep down, we believe there's still time. That subtle postponement is responsible for a good part of the collective paralysis of adult life. Musashi wrote, in the Dokodo, a sentence that shocks with its bareness. Do not fear death. He wasn't preaching recklessness. He was recognizing that a clear awareness of finitude is the only honest starting point for a life with priorities. Whoever understands that time is limited stops wasting it on what doesn't matter. Whoever acts as if they had infinite time spends that time on trivialities. Finitude isn't the enemy of life, it's what gives life its weight. The Austrian psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, a survivor of Nazi concentration camps, wrote in Man's Search for Meaning, published in 1946, a sentence that works as a vaccine against chronic postponement. Live as if you were living for the second time and as if you had acted wrongly the first time around. The power of that sentence lies in its origin. The person who wrote it had survived Auschwitz, lost his entire family, witnessed the worst of the human condition, and still chose to build a meaning out of what remained. Ask yourself daily one question. If this were my last useful year of life, what would truly deserve my attention today? The answer to that question is the only true compass that exists. It doesn't mean you have to live as if you were going to die tomorrow. That's a cheap and misguided cliché. It means that the constant memory of finitude reorganizes, in silence, your internal hierarchy of priorities. Things that seemed important stop seeming so. Things that seemed dispensable gain urgency. People you were putting off seeing get back on the schedule. Conversations you were pushing aside happen. Work you were postponing gets started. Finitude is the only honest teacher. Everything else is entertainment. The Zen Buddhist monks in monasteries of ancient Japan practiced a specific meditation on death, called Maranasati in Pali, the memory of death. It wasn't a morbid practice. It was a technique of internal calibration. By confronting daily, even if only for a few minutes, the fact that this life will end, the practitioner perceived more clearly what deserved time and what didn't. Small offenses lost weight. Small pleasures gained value. Big postponements seemed absurd. The Roman Stoic philosophers practiced something similar, called memento mori, Remember that you will die, not to sink into despair, but to draw out of the present day all the urgency it deserved. Marcus Aurelius repeated this to himself almost daily in his meditations, reminding himself that he could leave life at any moment and that therefore he should regulate every act, word, and thought as if it were the last. After starting a transformation, many people give up in the middle of the road. They go back to the old patterns without even realizing they went back. It's the most common phenomenon in any process of real change. The first 30 days are easy because the motivation of the beginning is still there. The next 30 days are reasonable because some visible results have already started showing. But between the third and the 6th month, something curious happens. The novelty has passed. The results still aren't enough to impress anyone from the outside. The effort starts to feel disproportionate to the apparent return. That's the exact point where most people give up, days before the result actually starts to show up in a visible way. The last precept of the Dokudo is perhaps the most decisive. Never deviate from the way. Musashi understood something that few modern teachers verbalize. The way isn't a destination you reach. It's a choice that gets renewed every day. There's no arrival point where you can relax and stop choosing. Every day, you decide again whether to stay on the way or to step off it. There's no autopilot for a life well lived. That principle is difficult because it undoes the fantasy of arrival. The fantasy that, at some future moment, you'll have achieved everything you need and you'll finally be able to rest. That fantasy is perhaps the greatest psychological trap of adult life, because if arrival is the goal, any day on which you haven't arrived yet feels like a failure. Since arrival never actually happens, the sense of failure becomes the permanent backdrop of the experience. Trading the fantasy of arrival for the acceptance of the way is a deep reorganization. It's no longer about achieving something specific. It's about maintaining every single day the correct internal posture in the face of life. The great change of your life isn't going to happen in a dramatic moment of revelation or inspiration. It isn't going to come from a transformative spiritual retreat. It isn't going to descend in a single definitive therapy session. It isn't going to arrive with an external change of city, of job, of partner. It's already happening, silently, in every small decision to subtract instead of add, to focus instead of scatter, to walk alone instead of asking for approval, to accept what is instead of fighting against what can't be changed, to stay on the way instead of looking for shortcuts. In 6 to 12 months, whoever looks at you from the outside will see something that looks like a miracle. They'll ask, what happened? They'll want to know what the secret was, what the course was, what the book was, what the method was. You, on the inside, will know the simple and unsettling truth. There was no miracle. There was constancy. There was patient subtraction. There was protected focus. There was silent discipline. There was difficult acceptance. There was the trail of walking alone, sustained day after day, even when no one was watching, even when there was no immediate reward, even when the fantasy of arrival waved its cheap shortcuts at you. That's the transformation that lasts. Not the one that impresses, but the one that builds. Not the one you post, but the one you live. In 6 to 12 months, whoever looks at you from the outside will see something that looks like a miracle. They'll ask what happened. They'll ask for the secret, the course, the book, the method. You, on the inside, will know the simple and unsettling truth. There was no miracle. There was constancy. There was the patient subtraction of everything that didn't belong, the protected focus on the days when it was easier to scatter, the silent discipline when no one was watching. There was difficult acceptance of what couldn't be changed, and the trail of walking alone, sustained day after day, even when there was no immediate reward, even when the fantasy of arrival waved its cheap shortcuts at you. That's the transformation that lasts. Not the one that impresses, but the one that builds. Not the one you post, but the one you live. If this content touched something important in you, leave your like, subscribe to the channel to follow along with the next reflections, and consider joining our members club for deeper and more practical content on philosophy applied to real life.